Hi, I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily. This is an episode we recorded around about a week or so ago. And if you like your politics, your political geekery and wonkery, and just need 20 minutes of escapism from what's happening in the world, well, hopefully you'll enjoy this. Once upon a time, I was a lobby correspondent, a political journalist, patrolling the corridors of power and the pubs that were closest to them. And there is certainly much about those days that I miss. But I'm very pleased to say that long gone are the days when I'd be sent to some random leisure centre on a Thursday night to cover the by-election in the constituency of bedknobs and broomsticks or whatever. Yet for my colleague and friend, our chief political correspondent Jon Craig, the lure of machine-vended instant coffee and broadcasting at 4 a.m. has never lost its appeal. In fact, he's about to attend his 40th, and undeniably there remains something a bit exciting about a by-election. They are unpredictable, especially with places which rarely make the news agenda suddenly getting lots of attention. And so we thought we'd invite him into the studio and take the chance to commemorate this historic moment. Jon Craig, welcome back to the Daily.
It's always a pleasure, Neil.
Is it, though, always a pleasure covering a by-election?
Oh, God, yes. Absolutely. I love them, actually.
Why?
They're almost as much fun as party conferences.
Oh,
and
God.
We've just had those.
But 40 of them, John. I mean, how long have you been at Sky now?
Over 20 years, coming up to 21, actually. So it's roughly 2 a year. Although the last year or so, there's been 9 or 10 within a year or so, going back to December. So we've had an absolute spate of them.
We will be looking back in just a moment, but shall we look forward to Tamworth and, of course, Mid Beds? Let's start with that Nadine Dorries constituency. By-election, of course, has now been triggered, but it was pending for an awful long time, wasn't it? Nadine Dorries announced her resignation, then I think forgot to send in the letter, something like that?
No, it wasn't quite like that. What happened was, of course, she got very miffed that she was being denied a peerage that Boris Johnson had promised her. She quit at the same time as her not-so-secret crush, Boris Johnson, back in June or July, and indeed another member of the Boris Johnson fan club, Nigel Adams. So towards the end of July, we had the by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Boris Johnson's old constituency, and Selby and Ainsty, which was Nigel Adams' constituency. Tories held Uxbridge, but lost Selby and Ainsty. Now, Nadine Dorries hung on. She didn't get her letter in to formally resign. And so it's been postponed and postponed. And here we are. It's happening in October. And poor old Nadine's got no peerage.
What about Tamworth? Of course, the circumstances there are slightly different. Chris Pincher resigning after losing his appeal for his suspension for some pretty serious offences.
Incidents at the Carlton Club, the Tory Holy of Holies, where by his own admission he'd had too much to drink and let himself down. But Chris Pincher, of course, was part of the reason for the downfall of Boris Johnson. I've always called it the 3 Ps: Paterson, Partygate and Pincher.
Just quick an interjection here. It's nothing to do with me. Another Paterson.
Owen Paterson. And, of course, there was a by-election in his North Shropshire seat, a very safe Tory seat. But the Lib Dems won that. So here we have the long-delayed by-election in Mid Bedfordshire, which, of course, has given the opposition parties, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, lots and lots of time to do their campaigning. Less so in Tamworth, but the writs were moved early September when the Parliament was back for its fortnight before the party conferences. So they're good, potentially interesting by-elections. Labour will be hoping to win Tamworth. The one in Mid Beds is much more difficult to call because the Lib Dems and Labour are both fighting it, and the Tories could come through the middle.
I mean, you mentioned the Lib Dems there. Let's cast our eyes backwards to where you first started for Sky on the by-election circuit. And Brent East, I think it was, back in 2003. Again, it was a Liberal Democrat victory. And actually, if we go over the course of your 40 by-elections, there have been plenty where the Lib Dems have seemingly come out of nowhere and won, haven't they?
Yes, but they put in plenty of effort every time. And they are tenacious by-election campaigners, the Lib Dems. They love by-elections. And they've got a fantastic record over the years, going back years and years and years. Now, Brent East, that was a seat previously represented by Ken Livingstone, who became London Mayor. Now, he was succeeded at the general election of 2001 by a man called Paul Daisley. I think he was a local councillor, but he sadly died after not very long. And there was a by-election there, and that was won by a Lib Dem, Sarah Tether. and she held the seat until losing it in. There were big boundary changes there. So Sarah Tether beat Labour, well, beat everybody there. That was quite a dramatic by-election, because that's one of those by-elections where you go to the count and you're not quite sure who's going to win.
I hereby declare that Sarah Louise Tether is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Brent East constituency.
Tony Blair, I hope that you are listening tonight. The people of Brent have spoken for the people of Britain. They want you to listen. They want you to deliver.
Now, here's a bit of parliamentary trivia for you.
Oh, from you, John, there's a surprise.
Listen, if it's trivia you want, I'm your man. The Tory candidate at the Brent East by-election was Uma Fernandez.
Sorry, I'm supposed to know who that is, aren't I?
She is the mother of Suella Braverman.
Oh, wow.
Who
I
was
didn't know that.
previously Suella Fernandez, but her mum, Uma Fernandez, was the Tory candidate in Brent East, the one won by Sarah Tether.
Daily listeners, I should point out at this juncture that Jon Craig is not sitting here with massive reams of notes, a laptop open, as you often see our deputy political editor doing. No, he has 2 sheets of A4 paper, one of which is just a list.
It's a list of the by-elections, yes.
And the rest of this information coming off the top of your head, John.
Yeah, of course.
So what is it then about these by-elections that you find most fascinating?
Some by-elections can be a turning point. Now, Tamworth, there was a by-election in that constituency, I think it was called South East Staffordshire, a year or so before Tony Blair's victory in 1997. And that was a sign that Labour were on course for a big majority. I wonder if Rutherglen and Hamilton West was a turning point in Scotland, because Labour had a massive swing, and certainly the Labour Party, both nationally and in Scotland in particular, think that that big swing of over 20%, if that's repeated elsewhere in Scotland, Labour could win 20, 25, or in some predictions even say up to 40 seats in Scotland, which really would set Sir Keir Starmer on the road to Downing Street.
There are other kind of major upsets in by-elections which perhaps don't reflect a shift in politics nationally, but do provide a snapshot of a moment in time. And I'm thinking immediately of George Galloway, 2012, Bradford West.
Yeah, that was a shock. That is the most memorable by-election of all the ones I've covered. What happened there was that I remember going to the count, and we went for a meal. A few of us went for a meal with Jerry Sutcliffe. Now, he was a Labour minister in the Blair years, MP for Bradford South, and we went to a lovely Asian restaurant, had a lovely meal. People in the restaurant were saying to Jerry Sutcliffe, who I think was in charge of the Labour campaign, "Your phone's not ringing, Jerry." And he said, no news is good news. Well, it turned out Labour were guilty of terrible complacency. When we got to the count, Labour thought they were going to win, exactly the same as at Brent East, actually. Labour thought they were going to win that. And midway through the evening, we thought, perhaps they're not. And George had fought a typical, might call a typical Galloway campaign to attract the vote of the Asian community in Bradford. Now, he rang me. I can't remember what time it was, about 11:30, midnight, something like that. "I'm going to win, John."
That was Jon Craig doing a Scottish accent there.
It was supposed to be gorgeous George.
I'm saying to you that we have won this evening the most sensational political victory in British by-election history. Do the maths, you'll see.
And, of course, Labour were furious with him because he'd had a very acrimonious falling out with the Labour Party. He was then leader of a party called Respect. He won a spectacular victory, and Labour were so furious they wouldn't give him an office when he arrived in Parliament. He had to set up in Portcullis House at the tables there, and made a great play of the fact that the Labour were being so beastly to him. But George Galloway is one of politics' street fighters, and of course been a controversial character over the years.
To go back to the point about national issues, local issues, what about Uxbridge? I mean, of course, that was Boris Johnson's old seat. You'd suspect he had a pretty healthy majority there. What was it, 20?
It was only about 7,500. What happened there was a good example of a local issue defeating, in this case, the Labour Party, who were, again, guilty of complacency there. When I go to a by-election, I always try and talk to the returning officer as soon as I can to find out what he or she knows and butter them up and tell them they're going to be live on Sky News and all that sort of stuff. And the returning officer that night said to me, I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, Labour thought they were going to win this by-election comfortably, but they have massively underestimated the unpopularity of the ULEZ. Now, that was the £12.50 a day charge that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, brought in London late August. But this by-election was about a month before. The Tories exploited it ruthlessly, picked a local candidate, a local councillor, and won the seat. And, of course, Labour were furious, and the Tories capitalised on that, or so they thought, reacted to it, certainly. Week or so later, Rishi Sunak announced he's dumping all the green... what a previous Tory politician called the green crap, all those green measures, net zero and so on, and because the Tories obviously thought, well, they're unpopular, we're going to get rid of those.
Wise to do that, though, off the back of one by-election result in a constituency which was used to be the seat of one Boris Johnson.
The reaction of Rishi Sunak, I think, was really to please his Tory right-wingers, his Tory backbenchers, Tory activists who were screaming against all the green measures that had been brought in by predecessors, David Cameron, Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak has been criticised for not caring that much about climate change, and on the evidence of what he did a month or so ago, it looks that way, doesn't it?
There must also have been some by-elections where your thoughts go not just to what is going to be happening on the night, but the reason for that by-election. I speak specifically about those where, an MP has died. I think of, personally, I think of James Brokenshire,
yep.
Conservative MP, Conservative Secretary of State, in fact, who I knew over a number of years. And his death, I think, hit plenty of us who knew him quite well pretty hard.
Oh, he was such a popular guy. That was in towards the end of 2021. That was a safe Tory seat. That old Bexley in Sidcup was a seat once represented by Sir Edward Heath.
Of course, yeah.
There was also the by-election in Southend. David Amis was tragically killed. And, of course, Joe Cox was killed back in 2016, exactly a week before the referendum. Now, that night, it was the 16th of June 2016, was the night of the Tooting by-election, won by Rosanna Allen Khan, who succeeded Sadiq Khan. I've never been to a by-election count where there was shock and there was just none of the political point scoring. It was all very, very sombre indeed.
First of all, I would like to give my profound thanks to the people of Tooting for electing me as their MP. But my thoughts and prayers are with Jo's husband and her children. She was a proud and passionate campaigner who will be desperately missed.
When we come back, we will be discussing how on earth does someone do 40 by-elections and retain this level of enthusiasm? Because I'm perplexed. We'll be back in a second. And we're continuing to talk about the many, many, many by-elections that have been covered by our chief political correspondent, Jon Craig.
Let me tell you about some of the bizarre things that have happened to me. Hartlepool in, 2021, which, of course, was a shock Tory win. I got COVID, red wall COVID. But then the funniest thing that's ever happened to me, Eastleigh in, I think it was 2013. So after the result, I was broadcasting. In Eastleigh, there is like a statue to commemorate the town's railway history and so on. But it's surrounded by all the fast food outlets, and there were all these rather leery lads there. And I'm addressing the nation from the square where the statue is. And the gallery keeps saying to me, hand back, hand back, hand back. And, of course, I carried on talking, as you do.
As you do.
And I said afterwards, well, why were you asking me to hand back there? And they said, because a young man dropped his trousers and bared his buttocks behind you. I said, oh, dear, I didn't realise that.
What do you do when you arrive at a by-election count? Some, as we've mentioned, some random sports centre. You're in a hall somewhere, squeaking away. How do you keep going? Come on, genuinely. Monkey glands, coffee.
I tell you what, I always go to wherever we're going and have a bit of a rest in the afternoon. Don't get to the count too early. Absolutely no alcohol. I remember in the old days where you mentioned sports halls and so on. I can remember quite a few by-elections when there was a bar in the sports centre or whatever, and Nigel Farage would turn up with all his cronies, and they just get more and more drunk in the bar. But you don't see the bar doesn't seem to be open anymore.
No, I think times may well have changed.
I was going to say, I'll give you another piece of trivia. Right. in the Bromley and Chislehurst by-election, which I think was 2005, 6, can't remember, something like that. Now, I wasn't there. I was at Blaenau Gwent because there was about 2 by-elections that night. That was the night when independent Labour was fighting Labour. But at Bromley and Chislehurst, which famous politicians of the present day were candidates at Bromley and Chislehurst?
See, this is the bit where I'm going to be quite embarrassed, because that was actually when I was a political correspondent, wasn't it, John? Yes. Carry on.
Rachel Reeves
for
Labour.
Yes.
And Nigel Farage for UKIP then. They came nowhere, both of them. And that was the one Bob Neal won, but that was very close, actually.
That's why I don't remember.
Yeah.
John, clearly, this is all really interesting to the likes of you and me. And
Political anoraks, you mean?
Yeah, totally. Geeks. Proper geeks.
Nerds.
But also to some other people as well, I suspect. But what is the utility of a by-election in terms of telling you about the state of politics? I mean, every time there's a by-election, we do this thing where we project what it means at a general election. And we shouldn't do that, should we? Really?
Well, the parties do, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, at the Labour Party conference, they had a big celebration with their candidate, Michael Shanks, who I thought was a very good candidate, quite a modest guy, teacher, works with, also volunteers with disabled children and so on. Ian Murray, the Shadow Scotland Secretary, Anna Sarwar. Big celebration, and Sir Keir Starmer referred to him as well. The parties always claim, oh, this is a turning point, terribly significant. Now, it's fair to say that we were talking about the Lib Dems earlier. A lot of seats that are won in by-elections go back to the party that held them previously in a general election. And obviously that's what the Tories will be hoping with some of those seats that they've lost to the Lib Dems in recent by-elections. But in terms of the Lib Dems and what we call the blue wall, I saw a very interesting statistic. There are 90 seats where the Lib Dems came second at the last general election, and 81 of those the Lib Dems were second place to the Tories. So the Lib Dems, I think, will be really going for the Tories at the next election.
Let's return, shall we, to where we started, Tamworth and Mid Bedfordshire.
Yes.
Tamworth to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a disgraced Conservative candidate who's stepped down, but he did have, I think, in 2019, a pretty significant majority. But you and I both know, if you are in any constituency, if you're a Conservative in any constituency with less than a 25,000 majority, you're probably quite worried.
Going back to Craig's rules of politics, I mean, my rule is that if a much-loved MP dies, good chance of holding the seat. Voters do not like MPs who go off and get swanky jobs in Brussels or with some company or whatever, that they get punished for that. And of course they don't like their MP who's been in some dreadful sleazy scandal either. So that makes it harder for the Tories to hold on to Tamworth, as it was in Owen Paterson's seat of North Shropshire. So I think the writing's on the wall for the Tories in Tamworth, because voters will probably be pretty disgusted at Mr Pincher's conduct.
But in Mid-Beds, if not a 3-horse race, then it is a 2-horse race.
Well, it probably is a 3-horse race, actually, because as the Tories could come through the middle. And, of course, all the reports we hear is that voters in that constituency were fed up with Nadine Dorries. It's claimed she wasn't holding surgeries, although she claimed she was continuing to represent her constituents. So she has not done the Tories any favours by, first of all, hanging on for ages, and then secondly, according to critics, not doing any work on behalf of her constituents. So the omens are not good for the Tories.
Also something to look for, John. How will you be celebrating your 40th by-election of your Sky News career?
I'm not sure I will be celebrating. I'll just be, staying up as late as I have to. Probably... I'll let you into a secret. I quite like to, because they always like me to write a piece of analysis for online when I get, and it's quite like to get back to the hotel at 3 a.m. and get the night porter to give me a glass of wine, and then sit down in the bar and write my analysis. When I got back to the hotel next to Hamilton Park Racecourse, the night porter said, no, the bar's closed. So I had to sit in my hotel room like a sado, knocking out my copy for online.
Well, look, I might slip you a $5 so you can get one on me. John, it's always a pleasure having you on the podcast. Thanks very much indeed.
And we miss you on the political team, Neil. You were very good. Before the lure of the grease paint took you away to the glamorous world of presenting.
And that is your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. We will be back again tomorrow.